In those days, there were practices that shame us now. Women without families, especially those with afflictions, could be contracted out for domestic service through the county. It was legal, even commonplace. But what happened that October morning in Millbrook, Colorado, proves that sometimes grace appears in the darkest corners. This story reminds us that true worth isn't measured in dollars or abilities, but in the quiet courage to recognize another person's humanity when the whole world looks away. Sometimes the most important decisions we make come in an instant, from somewhere deeper than thought. The laughter from the courthouse basement carried all the way to Main Street, where Jake Sutter stood counting his coins one more time. $14. Everything he had left after buying winter supplies: salt pork, flour, coffee. The October wind cut sharp through his worn butternut coat as another wave of male voices rose from below. Punctuated by what sounded like an auctioneer's rhythmic chant, Jake knew he should head back to his claim. 3 hours by Wacket, and that peculiar gray in the sky meant early snow coming. But something about those sounds, part carnival, part church social, all wrong, pulled him toward the basement stairs. The smell hit him first. Tobacco juice, unwashed bodies, and something else, fierce sweat, the kind that comes from cornered animals. 20-some men crowded the low-ceilinged room, their backs to Jake, focused on a raised platform at the far end. The county auctioneer, Hiram Dodd, stood beside a line of women. Next up, gentlemen, we have Katie O'Brien, strong as an ox, excellent with laundry. Jake's stomach turned. He'd heard tell of these auctions, but never witnessed one. Women who'd answered advertisements for domestic positions, or widows without means, contracted out for a year's labor. Legal, the territory judge had ruled, Christian charity. Some called it. The bidding was already underway. Sold to Mr. Garrett for $32. One by one, the women stepped down with their new employers. Some seemed relieved. Others walked like they were heading to their own funerals. Jake started to leave. This wasn't his business, and he needed those $14 for feed and tar when he noticed her. She sat alone at the platform's edge, separated from the others by several feet of empty space. Where the other women stood, she remained seated on a rough bench, her hands folded in her lap, fingers moving in a strange, repetitive pattern. Her dress was gray wool, patched but spotless. Brown hair pulled back severe, maybe 25 years old, maybe younger, hard to tell with her face turned down like that. Now, gentlemen, Dodd's voice changed, took on that joking tone that made Jake's jaw clench. We've saved something special for last. Emma Hartley here is a bit different from our other offerings. Dodd clapped his hands hard, right beside Emma's head. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Deaf as a fence post, gentlemen, can't hear thunder if it struck beside her. The laughter grew uglier. Someone stomped hard on the wooden floor, sending vibrations through the planks. Emma must have felt it, because she looked up then, and Jake saw her eyes gray-green, like sage after rain. They swept across the crowd without stopping, without expecting anything. Her fingers, Jake found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Through a gap between shoulders, he watched her hands. There was something familiar about that rhythm, something that tugged at memory from long ago. She's not entirely useless, Dodd was saying. Raised in a minister's house, knows her letters. We'll start the bidding at $5. Silence. $3. Nothing. $2. Surely someone has Christian charity. What happens if nobody bids? A thin merchant asked. County poorhouse, I suppose? Or the state asylum in Pueblo, they take all kinds. Jake's chest went tight. His mother had played piano in church before she passed. hymns every Sunday. His favorite had been Rock of Ages, and she'd let him sit beside her on the bench, watching her fingers move across the keys. The pattern to Emma's fingers made it was the opening bars of that hymn, repeated over and over. She was playing music only she could hear, holding on to something familiar in this basement full of strangers bidding on human lives. "Going once for $2, Dodd announced. "Going twice. $14. Jake heard his own voice as if from a great distance. Every head in the room turned. Emma's fingers stopped mid-phrase. "Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story." Dodd's gavel hung suspended in mid-swing. The auctioneer's mouth worked like a landed fish, opening and closing without sound. The basement air grew thicker. Pressing against Jake's eardrums, young Mr. Sutter. "Isn't it?" Dodd finally managed, squinting through the tobacco haze. "Did you say $14? Jake's voice came out steady, though his pulse hammered in his throat. His right hand found his coat pocket, fingers closing around the cloth pouch that held everything. The heavy-set man who'd been making crude gestures turned full around. Sweat beaded along his jowls, despite the basement's chill. "Boy's lost his mind. That's his whole winter steak," someone muttered behind Jake. "Saw him at Jensen's this morning, buying supplies." Jake kept his eyes on Emma. She'd raised her head, studying him with that same gray-green gaze that had swept the crowd moments before. No hope in it, no fear either, just assessment, like she was measuring the distance between two fence posts. $14, Dodd repeated. Recovering his showman's voice, "Well now, gentlemen, we have a legitimate bid. Do I hear 15 too?" Silence stretched. The coal oil lamps hissed overhead. Someone's boot scraped against the floor. Emma's fingers twitched once, then stilled completely in her lap. 14 going once?" Dodd drew it out, scanning the crowd. "Going twice." The gavel cracked against the podium. "Sold $14 to—" He squinted at Jake again. "Young Mr. Sutter." The men parted as Jake walked forward. His boots scraped against the dusty floor, each step deliberate. The cloth pouch grew damp in his palm. Emma hadn't moved, hadn't looked away, but her knuckles showed white where her hands pressed together. Jake stopped beside the bench. This close, he could see the exhaustion beneath her composure. Dark circles under her eyes, chapped lips, a small sure through her left eyebrow, old and white against her skin. He touched her shoulder, barely a tap, just enough to get her attention. She jerked, eyes flying wider. The basement sounds, laughter, dying, chairs scraping, men gathering coats, all of it fell away. There was just this moment. This woman who'd been playing a hymn with her fingers while men decided her fate. Jake pointed to himself, then to her, then toward the stairs. She understood, rose from the bench, slow, as if her joints ached from sitting. When she reached beneath the bench for something, Jake heard metal against metal, a carpetbag, worn leather with tarnished clasps. She straightened, gripping the bag with both hands, and looked at him again. Not grateful, not frightened, just waiting. That's when Jake noticed the paper pinned to her collar. Small, folded twice, official-looking seal visible through the worn fabric of her dress. The county office reeked of cigars and wet dog. A thin clerk with ink-stained fingers spread papers across his desk, not looking up as Jake and Emma entered. The man's pen scratched against a ledger, filling in columns with practice strokes. "Contract of domestic service?" The clerk's voice came out nasal. "Board. 1-year term. You provide food, shelter, clothing as needed. She provides household labor." He pushed the paper forward, tapped a line at the bottom. "Sign here." Jake took the pen. The metal felt cold between his fingers. His hand trembled slightly as he made his X on the line. $14. He'd have to tell Jensen he couldn't pay for the tar now. The roof would leak another winter. The clerk slid the paper toward Emma. She set down her carpetbag, took the pen with steady fingers, dipped it in the inkwell once, precise. Her hand moved across the page in smooth, practiced strokes. Emma rose Hartley. The clerk's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Well, don't see that every day." He sanded the wet ink, blew the excess away. "Take your copy. Next." Outside, Jake's wagon waited where he'd left it. The horses stood with heads low, breath steaming in the cold air. Emma stopped on the courthouse steps, gripping her carpetbag with both hands. The October wind whipped loose strands of hair across her face. She didn't push them away. Jake climbed up first. The wagon seat creaked under his weight. He turned, extended his hand to help her up. Her fingers felt like ice through his work glove. She settled on the bench, placed the carpetbag between her feet. The metal clasps caught the afternoon sun, tarnished silver beneath years of handling. Jake gathered the reins, clicked his tongue. The horses lurched forward. The wagon wheels found the deep ruts leading out of town. Emma's knuckles went white against the side rail as they bounced over a particularly deep hole. Her other hand pressed against her stomach, holding herself steady. They passed the last buildings of Millbrook, the butcher shop with its row of hanging rabbits. The seamstress, with her help wanted sign in the window. Emma's head turned slightly toward that sign, then away. Movement overhead caught Jake's eye. A red-tailed hawk circled against the gray sky, wings stretched wide. Emma's hand rose from her lap, pointing. She flattened her palm, showed it diving down, then rising. Her eyes met his, questioning. Jake nodded. Yes, he'd seen it. Yes, it was hunting. The smallest shift in her shoulders, not quite relaxation, but something loosening. She turned to watch the road ahead, one hand still gripping the rail as the wagon hit another series of ruts. 3 hours. That's what lay between town and his claim. 3 hours to figure out how to tell her about the cabin one room. Logs chinked with mud that washed out every heavy rain. The roof that leaked in 2 places. The stove that smoked when the wind came from the north. The sun hung lower now, painting long shadows across the prairie grass. Emma hadn't moved, except to steady herself against the wagon's sway. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead. But Jake caught her fingers moving again, in her lap, different pattern this time. Not the hymn from the auction. She was counting, marking distance, maybe, or time. The wagon crested the last rise. Jake's cabin squatted in the valley below, smaller than it ever looked when he approached it alone. The door hung crooked in its frame, visible even from here. Emma's counting stopped. The wagon wheels ground to a stop beside the lean-to that served as a barn. The horses' heads drooped, sides heaving from the long pull. Jake's hands cramped as he released the reins. He climbed down, boots hitting hard-packed dirt. His legs had gone stiff from the cold ride. Emma remained on the wagon seat, carpetbag in her lap, studying the cabin. Her eyes moved across the structure logs, chinked with mud, gaps showing where last month's rain had washed the filling away, the roof of split shingles, edges curling up like dried leaves, the door that wouldn't close proper without a shoulder shoved against it. Jake came around to her side. She was already standing, ready to climb down on her own. He stepped back, gave her room. She gripped the wagon side, lowered herself, careful, testing the ground with one foot before committing her weight. The cabin door stuck when Jake pushed it. swollen from last week's rain. He pressed his shoulder against the wood, felt it give with a scrape that ran up his spine. The smell rolled out old smoke, bacon grease, his own sweat from too many nights without washing. Emma stepped inside behind him. Her eyes moved systematic across the single room. The rope bed in the corner, corn husk mattress, visible through gaps in the ticking. Two mismatched chairs he'd bought off a family heading back east. The cast iron stove his mother had hauled from Missouri, rust showing at the joints. 3 plates on a crude shelf, a dented pot, the water bucket with its frayed rope handle. Jake pointed to the bed, then to her, pointed to himself, then toward the door of the barn. She shook her head. Quick, decisive, pointed to herself, then to the floor near the stove. Jake shook his head harder, pointed again, bed, her. Emma's mouth pressed into a thin line. She walked to the bed, pulled off the quilt threadbare, more patches than original fabric, spread it on the floor by the stove, sat down on it, looked up at him with those gray-green eyes that said the matter was settled. Jake's stomach cramped, not from hunger, though he hadn't eaten since morning, but from watching her fold herself onto that hard floor like she belonged there. He turned to the shelf, reached for the bean sack. His fingers found mostly cloth, a handful of beans rattling at the bottom. The cornmeal tin wasn't much better. Emma stood, came to the shelf, examined the tin, tilted it to judge the weight, held up 3 fingers, made a question with her eyebrows. 3 days. Was she asking if this was all the food for 3 days? Jake nodded. She pressed her lips together, took the tin from him, measured out a portion smaller than he would have used, added water from the bucket, stirred with a tarnished spoon she'd pulled from her carpet bag. Her movements were quick, practiced. The spoon caught the light silver, despite the tarnish. She'd brought her own silver spoon to this dirt floor cabin, while beans boiled and cornbread baked in the Dutch oven. Jake remembered his mother's trunk, shoved under the bed when he'd first moved in, forgotten these 3 months. He dropped to his knees, grabbed the leather straps, dragged it out. Dust swirled, caught in the last shaft of sunlight through the window. Emma stepped back, giving him room. The lid creaked on its hinges. His mother's wedding dress lay on top, yellow with age, smelling of lavender sachets long since turned to dust. Beneath it, he'd forgotten this was here. His mother's teaching supplies from before she married, when she'd taught school in Jefferson County. A McGuffey reader, pages foxed with mildew, a bundle of pencils tied with a ribbon that fell apart when he touched it, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth. Jake's fingers closed around it, lifted it out. The oilcloth fell away, revealing a slate board, maybe 12 inches square. The wooden frame was scratched but solid. In a small tin box tucked against the slate, 2 pieces of chalk. He held it toward Emma. Her eyes went wide. She reached out, stopped inches from the slate, looked at him for permission. Jake placed it in her hands. Her fingers ran along the wooden frame, touched the dark slate surface like it was something precious. She opened the tin box, lifted out 1 piece of chalk, held it between her fingers, testing its weight. The beans were done. Jake found 2 spoons, his and one of Emma's silver ones, from her carpet bag. The metal was heavy, elaborate pattern on the handle, letters engraved there, EMH, her initials or her mother's. They sat on opposite sides of the table he'd cobbled from barn boards. The wood was rough, splinters catching its sleeves. Emma ate slow, making her a small portion last. The cornbread was different from his usual attempts, lighter somehow. Though she'd used the same ingredients, she'd added something, or stirred it different, or knew some trick his mother had never taught him. The sun set while they ate. Jake lit a tallow candle, the smell of animal fat mixing with the lingering bean steam. Emma wiped the pot clean with a rag from her carpet bag, dried the spoons careful, set everything back on the shelf in order. The silver spoons went back in her bag. She sat at the table with the slate board. The chalk moved smooth across the surface. Emma rose Hartley. Perfect letters, each one formed like from a schoolbook. Jake sat across from her. She slid the slate toward him, offered the chalk. His fingers felt thick, clumsy. The chalk squeaked as he wrote beneath her name, Jake Sutter. She studied his writing, then took the rag from her pocket, erased both names with careful strokes. Wrote again, I can work hard. Jake took the chalk. I know. Emma erased again. Show me morning work. Chickens? Water? Wood? She nodded, took the chalk. I will start before you wake. You need rest. I need to earn my keep. The chalk felt smaller in Jake's grip as he wrote, You already have. Emma's finger traced those words once, twice. Her throat moved like she was swallowing something that wouldn't go down. She erased slow, wrote, Why? Jake took the chalk, started to write, stopped. The chalk hovered over the slate. How could he explain about her fingers playing that hymn, about $14 being everything but somehow not enough to walk away? He wrote, Seemed right. Emma's finger traced these new words. She looked up at him, and something shifted in her face. Not a smile, just a softening around her eyes. She wrote one more thing before standing to prepare for sleep. Thank you, Mr. Sutter. Jake stared at the words after she turned away to arrange her quilt by the stove. Mr. Sutter. Nobody had ever called him that, made him sound like somebody who mattered. He picked up the chalk to write something back, then noticed she'd left the period off Mr. His mother used to say that about new grammar rules from back east, said periods and titles were becoming old-fashioned. Emma Rose Hartley, perfect penmanship. Silver spoons in her carpet bag. Who exactly had he just bought for $14? Coffee smell pulled Jake from sleep. Not the burnt, bitter brew he usually made, but something rich, almost sweet. His eyes opened to gray pre-dawn light. The stove already crackled with fresh wood. Emma stood at the table, back to him, pouring hot water through cloth stretched over the pot. Steam rose around her face. She twisted her hair into a tight knot, secured with those pins from her carpet bag. Her dress, the same gray wool, showed wrinkles where she'd slept in it. Jake sat up. The blanket slid off, cold air hitting his chest through the thin undershirt. Floorboards creaked under his weight. Emma turned, saw him awake, pointed to a cup on the table. Still steaming, he pulled on his boots, walked over. The coffee was black as tar but smooth going down, no grounds between his teeth like usual. Emma held up the cloth she'd used, muslin, looked like from a petticoat. Coffee grounds nested inside like dark soil. She'd already been to the pump fresh water in the bucket, his other shirt soaking in the wash basin. Jake heard the chickens outside, that satisfied clucking they made after eating. He picked up the slate. How long awake? Emma glanced at the window, held up 4 fingers. 4 hours. The sun wasn't even up proper yet. She wrote, could not sleep, worked instead. Jake noticed the floor then, swept clean. The corners where dust and straw usually collected, nothing. His 3 plates sat washed on the shelf, arranged by size. The window, she'd wiped it with something. Morning light came through clearer. You need rest, he wrote. Emma shook her head, wrote quickly. Need to prove useful. She was already moving toward the door, picking up the egg basket he'd forgotten he owned. Jake followed her outside. The chickens rushed her like she was their long-lost mother. She scattered grain from her apron pocket. When had she found the grain tin behind the barn? Her skirts brushed through the birds without disturbing them. She gathered eggs while they pecked around her feet. 7 eggs. Jake usually found 3, maybe 4. He left her to it, grabbed his hammer and fence post he'd cut last week. The northern stretch had gaps where cattle could wander through if he had cattle worth keeping. But fixing fence meant maybe having cattle someday. The sun climbed. Jake's shirt stuck to his back despite the October cold. Sweat ran down between his shoulder blades, pooled at his belt. His water jar sat empty, forgotten to fill it. The hammer felt heavier with each swing. A shadow fell across the post he was setting. Emma stood there, plate in her hands. Cornbread, still warm. Salt pork fried crispy. One of the eggs cooked hard. Jake's hands were black with dirt and sweat. Emma had brought a wet rag, too, draped over her arm. He wiped his hands, took the plate. The cornbread was different from last night's lighter. The salt pork had been cut thin, cooked slow so it didn't curl up tough. Emma pointed to his water jar, then back toward the cabin, raised her eyebrows. Jake nodded. She took the jar, walked back across the field. Her skirts caught on the tall grass, leaving a trail through the frost-tipped stalks. 2 weeks passed like this. Emma up before dawn, Jake waking to coffee and swept floors, her working steady through the day, mending, cooking, tending chickens, him watching her from the corner of his eye while he worked his own chores, evenings with the slate between them, riding back and forth in the candlelight. She taught him things without meaning to. How she tested the wind each morning, standing in the doorway with her palm raised. How she felt for the chicken's approach through the ground's vibration. How she knew when water was boiling by the steam's pattern, not its sound. The 3rd week, Jake woke to hands shaking his shoulders, not gentle, urgent. Emma's face hung above him in the dark, eyes wide. She pressed one finger to the window, then to her chest, back to the window. Jake sat up, squinted at the glass. Ice, not frost ice, forming on the inside of the pane. The temperature had dropped hard since he'd gone to sleep. Emma grabbed his arm, pulled him to the window. She pointed outside where the chickens huddled against the coop wall, all facing the same direction, south, away from whatever was coming from the north. She made a swooping motion with her hand wind. Strong wind. Jake's feet hit the cold floor. October blizzards killed cattle, killed people who weren't ready. He yanked on boots, grabbed his coat. Emma already had her shawl wrapped tight, was shoving things into a grain sack, beans, cornmeal, matches, outside. The air felt wrong, too still, but heavy, pressing against his eardrums. The sky to the north showed black where stars should be. The cattle has his 6 head, all he'd managed to buy, stood in the far pasture, heads up, restless. If that storm hit while they were in the open, Emma appeared beside him with rope. She'd thought of rope. Jake took one end, gave her the other. They'd need to stay connected when the snow got thick. They ran toward the pasture. The cattle saw them coming, started to scatter. Jake waved his arms, trying to herd them toward the barn. 2 young steers bolted the wrong direction. Emma sprinted after them, skirts hiked up, moving faster than seemed possible. She got ahead of the steers, spread her arms wide. They veered back toward the barn. The first wind hit like a fist. Jake's hat flew off, vanished into the dark. Snow came horizontal, driving straight into their faces. The rope between him and Emma pulled taut. One heifer balked at the barn entrance. Jake shoved his shoulder against her flank. Emma appeared on the other side, added her weight. The heifer stumbled forward. 5 cattle inside. Where was the 6th? Emma tugged the rope, pointed. The old milk cow stood frozen in the pasture's center, snow already building on her back. Jake started toward her, but Emma grabbed his sleeve, shook her head. She took the rope from his hands, tied it around her waist, pointed at him, then at the barn. Stay. She disappeared into the white. The rope played out 10 feet, 20. Jake wound it around his hands, ready to pull. The rope jerked once, twice. Their signal. Jake hauled back, felt resistance. Emma emerged from the white, bent forward, the cow's halter in her hands. The cow's eyes rolled white, but she followed Emma's steady pull into the barn, all six safe. Jake's hands shook as he barred the door. Emma leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Snow caked her hair, her eyebrows, her lips had gone blue. They fought back to the cabin through the screaming wind. 4 trips for wood, 5. Jake's fingers stopped feeling the pieces he grabbed, just kept loading his arms while Emma stacked. The water buckets, she filled them at the pump, the handle already freezing. Ice formed on the metal before they got inside. Jake slammed the door shut, dropped the bar across. The sudden quiet made his ears ring. Emma stood by the stove, whole body shaking, not just shivering, shaking like her bones might come apart. He grabbed her quilt, wrapped it around her shoulders. Her hands were white, red at the joints. First stage of frostbite. He pulled her to the stove, opened the firebox, held her hands near the heat, not touching metal that would damage the skin. Pink returned to her fingers. The shaking eased. She pulled the slate from where she tucked it in her apron, wrote with trembling hands, "Cattle safe." "You safe?" Jake wrote back. She nodded, then wrote, 3 days, maybe 4. The wind slammed something against the north wall. Jake looked at their supplies. If she was right about the storm's length, they'd need to ration. But tonight they were alive, warm, with walls between them and the white death outside. Emma wrote, "Teach you signs, help pass time." She held up her hand flat, moved it to her mouth, then pointed to the cornbread. "Eat." Jake copied the motion. She adjusted his fingers, moved his hand closer. He tried again. She nodded. Next fist tilted like drinking. "Water." Then both hands pressed together, laid against her cheek, eyes closed. Sleep. They went through dozens. Cold arms wrapped with a shiver, hot hand fanning face. Yes, fist moving like a nod. Help flat hand, lifting from opposite fist. That night, while the storm screamed, Jake pulled out his harmonica. His mother's brother had given it to him years back. He played Red River Valley, slow. Emma watched his fingers on the holes, then reached out, touched the harmonica while he played. Her eyes widened. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the vibrations. She took the harmonica, held it against her throat. Jake played again. Her face changed wonder. Maybe. She was hearing it through her bones. A crack like a gunshot. Jake bolted upright. The roof beam above his bed had split, snow pressing through the gap. Water streamed through the split beam, soaking Jake's mattress. The wood groaned, sagged another inch. Emma was already moving, grabbing the wash bucket, shoving it under the worst of the leak. Jake grabbed the splitting beam with both hands, tried to push it back up. The wood groaned louder. More snow pressed through, soaking his shoulders. Emma dragged the table underneath, climbed on top. Together, they shoved a chair against the beam, wedging it tight. The splitting stopped, for now. 3 days the storm raged, 3 days of checking that chair every hour, emptying buckets of melting snow, feeding the fire. Emma taught Jake more signs. He taught her to whittle. She carved a small bird from kindling while the wind screamed. When the candles ran low, they sat in firelight, not needing words or signs, just sitting, listening to the storm die slow. The 4th dawn came quiet. Jake pushed against the door, stuck, snow packed against it chest high. He climbed out the window, Emma passing him the shovel. 2 hours to dig a path to the barn. The cattle lowed when he entered, hungry but alive, all 6. 2 weeks before the road to Millbrook cleared enough for wagon travel, Jake's food stores had dwindled to nothing, handful of beans, cornmeal dust in the bottom of the tin. Emma had made the last of the flour into thin pancakes that morning, using water instead of milk they didn't have. "Town today," Jake wrote on the slate. Emma's hand paused over her coffee cup, really just hot water, with burnt grain for color. She nodded, but her fingers drummed against the table, same rhythm as that hymn from the auction. Jake hitched the horses while Emma changed into her better dress, still patched, but cleaner. She'd washed it yesterday in snowmelt, dried it by the fire. When she climbed into the wagon, her knuckles went white on the seatboard. The ride took longer, with the road still soft from snowmelt. Emma sat rigid beside Jake, eyes fixed ahead. As the first buildings appeared, she pulled her shawl tighter, ducked her chin down. Jensen's General Store sat on Main Street, windows fogged from warmth inside. Jake helped Emma down from the wagon. Her hand trembled in his. The bell above the door jangled. 5 women stood near the fabric counter, voices stopping mid-sentence. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, Mrs. Brennan from the boarding house. Others Jake knew by sight, but not name. Their eyes went straight to Emma. "Mr. Sutter," Jensen called from behind the counter. "Heard you bought yourself some help." Jake's jaw tightened. "Miss Hartley manages my household," one woman whispered to another, loud enough to carry. "Household? That what they're calling it now?" Emma moved toward the shelves, studying the goods like she hadn't heard. But Jake saw her shoulders pull up, her steps careful as walking on ice. She pulled out the slate, wrote her list. Jake read it over her shoulder. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, matches, the basics, nothing extra. She showed it to Jensen. "She can't talk," Jensen said, looking at Jake instead of Emma. "How do you tell her what needs doing? She reads and writes better than most." Jake said, "Including you, Jensen?" The storekeeper's face reddened. He started pulling items, measuring flour into a sack. When he set it on the counter, Emma pointed at the scale. The weight showed 8 pounds. She held up 10 fingers. "That's 10 pounds, Jensen said. Irritated, Emma shook her head, pointed at the scale again, tapped 8 fingers on the counter. Jake leaned over. The scale did read 8. "She's right. You're short 2 pounds. Jensen's mouth opened, closed. He added more flour, the needle creeping to 10. Honest mistake. Emma had moved to the fabric bolts. Her fingers traced over a blue calico, tiny yellow flowers printed on it. She checked the price tag, moved to the cheaper brown muslin. "The blue," Jake said. Emma shook her head, pointed to their supply list. They needed food, not pretty fabric. "The blue," Jake repeated. To Jensen, 3 yards. Mrs. Patterson snorted. "Dressing up your purchase, Mr. Sutter." Jake turned. The women had formed a half circle, watching like crows on a fence line. "Miss Hartley earned her wages 10 times over in the storm," Jake said, voice carrying through the store. "Saved my cattle, fixed my roof, manages my accounts better than I ever did, works harder than any 3 men I know." He looked at each woman in turn. "She's also a minister's daughter, educated, knows her Bible forward and back, more than some folks who just use church for gossip." Mrs. Brennan's face went red. "Well, I never—" "No," Jake cut her off. You never wondered what it's like to be sold because you can't hear. Never thought how she feels, standing here while you talk about her like she's not human." Emma touched his sleeve, gentle but firm. "Stop. Don't make it worse. The propriety." "Mr. Sutter." Pastor Williams' wife had stepped forward. "An unmarried woman in your home—" "Working," Jake said. Under legal contract, same as any hired hand, unless you're suggesting something improper about honest work. Emma wrote quickly on her slate, showed it to Jake. Please, just supplies. Jake read it, then held the slate up for the women to see. Miss Hartley says, please, just the supplies. See, perfect spelling. Better handwriting than mine. He turned back to Jensen. Add the blue fabric. And coffee, real coffee, not the cheap stuff. A pound of white sugar, and that peppermint candy in the jar. That'll run your credit past. I'll work it off. Hauling freight, whatever you need. Jensen marked it in his ledger. Emma had gone very still beside Jake, the slate pressed against her stomach. As Jensen wrapped their supplies in brown paper, she wrote something, showed it to the women. God bless you all. Mrs. Williams blinked. Mrs. Patterson looked away. Mrs. Brennan muttered something about needing to go. Outside, Jake loaded the wagon while Emma stood on the boardwalk. Her face had gone pale, but her back stayed straight. When he helped her up, she signed thank you, the sign she taught him during the storm. Halfway home, Emma touched his arm, pointed to a grove of cottonwoods off the road. Jake pulled the horses to a stop. Emma climbed down, walked into the trees. He heard her retching, being sick from the tension of town. When she came back, wiping her mouth with her handkerchief, Jake offered his water flask. She rinsed, spat, rinsed again, climbed back up beside him. He pulled out the paper bag of peppermint candy, offered her one. She looked at it, red and white stripes, perfectly formed, put it in her mouth, eyes closing at the sweetness. Jake took one too. They sat there, wagon stopped on the empty road, eating candy like children. Emma's color came back slow. She wrote on the slate, "Why defend me?" Jake took the chalk, started to write, erased it, finally wrote, "You deserve defending." Emma studied the words. A tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it quick, wrote, "They will talk worse now." "Let them. Your reputation." Jake took the chalk. "Already ruined, failed farmer, poor as dirt." Emma erased his words hard, chalk dust flying, wrote in firm strokes, "Not broken. Good man." They looked at each other across the slate. Emma's eyes had that fierce look from the storm. She erased again, wrote, "I was broken. At auction. You made me whole." Jake's throat got thick. He reached for the chalk, but Emma pulled the slate away. She had more to write. "How can I repay?" He grabbed the chalk before she could finish, wrote one word, "Stay." Emma stared at the word. The slate shook in her hands. She set it on the wagon seat between them, put her hands in her lap. They rode the rest of the way in silence. But when the cabin came into view, Emma signed something new. Jake didn't recognize it. She did it again, slower. One hand flat against her chest, the other covering it. The cabin door stood open, swinging in the wind. Fresh horse tracks circled the yard. Someone had been here while they were gone. Jake jumped down from the wagon, motioned Emma to stay put. The tracks led to the door, back out, circled the cabin twice. Large boots, a man walking slow, looking things over. Inside, nothing missing that Jake could see. But things had been moved. The slate sat on the bed instead of the table. Emma's carpet bag had been opened, the silver spoon scattered on the floor. The blue fabric still wrapped in brown paper lay untouched. Jake picked up the spoons, set them on the table. Emma appeared in the doorway, face pale. She saw her belongings disturbed, pressed her lips tight, started to step inside, then stopped, pointed at the floor near the stove. A folded paper sat where her quilt usually lay, official looking, with a seal. Jake picked it up, read the words twice before they made sense. Inspection completed per us, a domestic servant, present status unknown. Return visit required within 30 days to verify arrangement. Emma's eyes moved over the paper. The color drained from her face. She set it on the table, wrote on the slate, "County Clerk, checking contract compliance." "They thought you'd run off," Jake wrote. Her hand hesitated over the chalk. "Or that you had—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Emma wrote, "They could void contract, send me back." "Back where?" Her hand trembled. "Auction. Or asylum." Jake's stomach turned. The state asylum in Pueblo. Concrete rooms, barred windows. People went in, didn't come out. "Won't happen," he wrote. Emma erased his words, wrote, "You don't know these men." "What men?" She started to write, stopped, started again. Stepmother had arrangement with certain men who wanted quiet wives. The chalk snapped in her fingers. She picked up the other piece. "I refused, so auction instead." Jake's hands curled into fists. Emma touched his clenched hand, shook her head, wrote, "Anger won't help." 3 weeks passed. Emma worked twice as hard, as if perfect housekeeping could protect her. The cabin had never been cleaner. Meals appeared exact as clockwork. She mended everything Jake owned, and things he didn't know needed mending. But she wasn't sleeping. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking slightly when she thought he wasn't watching. At night, he heard her moving around, checking the door latch, peering out the window. The second week of February brought warm days, snow melting into mud. Emma insisted on doing laundry, hauling water from the pump until Jake took the buckets from her hands, did it himself. She scrubbed clothes on the washboard until her knuckles went raw. That night, Jake woke to strange sounds, not wind or animals. Coughing. Harsh, wet coughing from beside the stove. He lit a candle. Emma sat hunched on her quilt, hand pressed to her chest. In the yellow light, her face gleamed with sweat. Jake knelt beside her. Her forehead burned under his palm. She tried to push his hand away, but her movements were weak, uncoordinated. When she coughed again, red specks appeared on her handkerchief. The nearest doctor lived in Millbrook, 3 hours away, 3 hours there, 3 back. If the doctor was even home, if he'd even come for a servant girl who couldn't pay. Jake had watched his mother die of lung fever, same wet cough, same burning skin, same red specks that meant the sickness had gone deep. Emma's eyes rolled back. She slumped sideways. Jake caught her before she hit the floor, pulled her against him. Her body shook with chills despite the fever. No snow left, except in the deepest shadows. Jake carried Emma to his bed, proper mattress, not the floor. She moaned when he set her down, curled into herself. He ran outside, scraped dirty snow from behind the barn, wrapped it in cloth, pressed the snowpack to her forehead, her neck. Emma's eyes flew open, confused. She tried to sit up. Jake held her shoulders gentle but firm. Her lips moved, no sound he could hear. But he read the shape. Sorry. No sorry, he said aloud. Forgetting. Signed it no. Through the night, Jake sat beside the bed, cooling her fever with snowpacks, spooning water between her cracked lips. She drifted in and out. Once she grabbed his hand, held it tight like she was drowning. He squeezed back. Second night was worse. The coughing wouldn't stop. Blood now, not just specks. Emma's breath came in short gasps. Jake propped her up with every pillow and blanket roll he could find. She mumbled words he couldn't make out. Her hands moved in signs he didn't recognize, talking to people who weren't there. Once she signed what looked like mother, over and over. Jake made beef tea from the last of the salt pork, got a few spoonfuls down her throat, made a mustard plaster like his mother used to, spread it on Emma's chest. The smell made his eyes water, but seemed to ease her breathing. Third day, the fever broke. Jake had dozed in the chair, jerked awake when Emma's hand touched his arm. Her eyes were clear, aware. She tried to sign something, but her hands shook too much. Jake gave her the slate, chalk. She managed 3 letters. Why what? He wrote back, why stay with me? How to explain that somewhere between the auction and now, she'd become necessary, like breathing, like sunrise. He wrote, where else would I be? Emma's mouth moved. He leaned closer, felt more than heard the whispered word against his ear. Jake. His name. First time she'd said it aloud. She pulled back, eyes wide, wrote on the slate with shaking hands, I can hear some low sounds, feel vibrations, always could. Jake sat back. But auction, Emma kept writing, easier to be fully deaf, safer. Men want silent wives, not partial hearing. All this time, she nodded. Wrote, stepmother new, part of arrangement, sell as damaged goods. Men pay less but get obedient wife who can't complain. Jake stood, paced to the window. Emma tapped the slate. He came back, read, not your burden to carry. You're not a burden. Contract says different. Jake took the chalk, wrote hard enough to squeak, contract is paper, you are real. Emma traced the words with one finger. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Jake wiped them with his thumb. Her skin still felt too warm. She wrote, I lied to you. No, protected yourself. You could send me back for lying. Jake shook his head, wrote, never. Emma studied his face like looking for the trick, finding none. She sank back against the pillows, sleep pulling her under, but she managed to sign one thing, thank you. The front door creaked. Jake spun toward it. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a county badge. The clerk was back, and Emma was in Jake's bed. The clerk stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Tom Bradley. Jake recognized him now. Badge heavy on his vest, notebook in hand. Mr. Sutter. Bradley's gaze went straight to the bed, to Emma, lying there. Interesting arrangement. Jake stood, moved between Bradley and the bed. Miss Hartley's been sick, lung fever. In your bed. Floor's too cold for fever. Doctor's orders. No doctor had come, but Bradley didn't need to know that. Emma stirred, eyes opening. She saw Bradley, tried to sit up. Jake pressed her shoulder down, gentle. She needed rest. Bradley walked around Jake, studied Emma's pale face, the handkerchief spotted with dried blood on the nightstand. She looks poorly. 3 days of fever, just broke. Can she work? Jake's jaw tightened. When she's well. Contract says able-bodied domestic service. If she can't work, she works harder than any 3 people. Jake cut him off. Check the cabin. Spotless. Check my clothes. Mended. Check the books. Books? Jake pulled out the ledger Emma had started. Neat columns of numbers. Every expense and trade recorded in her perfect handwriting. Bradley flipped through it, eyebrows rising. Here. She does this, bruh. Rids rightus figures better than the bank clerk. Bradley looked back at Emma. She signed something to Jake, the sign for water. Jake poured her a cup, helped her drink. Bradley watched the silent communication, made notes in his book. The women in town say you two are familiar. The women in town say a lot of things. They say you defended her publicly, bought her fancy goods. 3 yards of fabric is fancy. Bradley's mouth twisted. For a servant, yes. Emma tapped Jake's arm, pointed to the slate. He gave it to her. She wrote slowly, weak but determined. Show contract. Jake pulled the paper from the shelf, handed it to Bradley. Read it. Food, shelter, clothing as needed. She needed a dress that wasn't falling apart. And the peppermint candy. How did he know about that Mrs. Patterson's tongue? Probably. My money. My choice. Bradley studied the contract. Says here she's to have separate sleeping quarters. She does. Jake pointed to Emma's quilt and pillow still arranged by the stove. When she's not dying of fever, the propriety. To hell with propriety. The words came out harder than Jake meant. She was dying. I did what needed doing. Bradley made more notes. Emma tapped the slate, wrote something, held it up. I am grateful for Mr. Sutter's care during illness. All proper, God as witness. Bradley read it, looked at her sharp. You invoke God. Emma nodded, met his stare straight on. A minister's daughter knew the weight of that invocation. Well, Bradley closed his notebook. I'll report she's present and accounted for, working when able. He moved toward the door, turned back. The contract expires in 6 weeks. Mr. Sutter, what then? Jake hadn't let himself think about it. That's between Miss Hartley and me. The county has interest in not supporting indigents. If she has no position, she'll have position. As what your housekeeper, the town won't stand for it. Unmarried woman living with a bachelor, then I'll marry her. The words fell into silence. Emma's chalk broke against the slate. Bradley's eyebrows climbed to his hairline. Marry a deaf woman. A woman, Jake corrected. The rest doesn't matter. Bradley laughed, short and sharp. You're a fool, Sutter. But it's your life to ruin. He left. Door banging shut. Jake stood frozen. Had he just said that out loud? To the county clerk who'd spread it through Millbrook by sunset, the slate hit the floor. Emma had tried to throw it, too weak to get distance. She turned her face to the wall, shoulders shaking, not coughing, crying. Jake knelt beside the bed. Emma, she wouldn't look at him, signed something over and over he recognized no, and maybe sorry. Her breath came in gasps that had nothing to do with sickness. He touched her shoulder. She jerked away. He picked up the slate, wrote, I didn't mean what? To say it, or didn't mean it at all? Jake erased. Tried again. Only way to protect you. Emma turned then, eyes red and furious. She grabbed the chalk, wrote in slashing letters, Not your job. Is now. Why? Jake took the chalk. His hand hovered over the slate. How to explain what he didn't understand himself? That seeing her on that auction platform had changed something. That watching her fingers play that silent hymn had broken something open in his chest. He wrote, Because I choose to. Emma stared at the words. Wrote, Choice means two people. Yes, you didn't ask me. She was right. He'd spoken for her, about her, like the auction all over again. Jake erased the slate, wrote, I'm sorry. Emma took the chalk, held it a long moment, wrote, 6 weeks to decide. Fair enough, more than fair. Jake nodded, started to stand. Emma caught his sleeve, wrote, Thank you for Bradley, for carrying when sick over the next weeks. As February melted into March, they didn't speak of marriage again. Emma recovered slow but steady. But something had shifted, an awareness in how they moved around each other, how their hands almost touched passing the water bucket, how Emma's eyes followed Jake when she thought he wasn't looking. The first week of March, Jake started hauling lumber from the sawmill, traded 3 days' labor for enough wood to frame a room. Emma watched from the doorway, coffee in her hands. As he measured and cut, he was adding to the cabin a real room, not a lean-to, with a door and window, a window with glass, not oiled paper. $2 a pane at Jensen's store, but Jake had credit from hauling freight. Emma didn't ask what he was building, didn't need to. A traveling drummer came through. selling seeds and notions. Emma met him at the gate, Jake watching from where he hammered boards. She had egg money. She'd been selling eggs to Mrs. Wilson down the road. She bought seeds, lots of seeds, and something else, wrapped in burlap. That afternoon, while Jake framed the room's walls, Emma planted not just vegetables for this year, asparagus crowns. Jake knew asparagus. 7 years before first good harvest, 7 years of tending before payoff. She was planting 7 years into the future. The room's frame stood complete by week's end. Jake had hung the door solid pine. The window hole waited for glass, ordered but not arrived. He came in from evening chores to find Emma standing in the new room. She'd hung something in the empty window frame, fabric, not just fabric curtains. White cotton with tiny blue flowers embroidered along the bottom edge. "Your mother's," he wrote on the slate. Emma nodded, wrote, "Saved them," when stepmother sold everything else. She'd hung her mother's curtains in the room he was building for her, claiming it, accepting it. That night, after supper, Emma brought the slate to where Jake sat fixing harness leather. Wrote carefully. Mr. Bradley was right. Jake's hands stilled on the leather. About what? Jake set down the harness leather. Emma wrote, "Town won't accept. Unmarried arrangement." Jake's chest got tight. "You want to leave?" Emma shook her head, wrote, "Want to stay." Then it added, "If you'll have me." Jake's hands shook as he took the chalk. As wife, as partner, equal, not servant, not property. "Never property," Jake wrote, "not since first day." Emma studied his face, wrote, "Then yes, yes to marriage, yes to partnership, to staying, to building something together." Jake set down the slate, reached across the table, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. Emma looked at his calloused hand, work rough and honest, placed her hand in his. They sat like that, hands clasped across the table. While the candle burned low, the curtains in the new room fluttered in the night breeze. The asparagus crowns settled into sail, ready for 7 years of growth. Jake stood in the barn 3 days later, his back to the door, practicing. His hands moved through the signs Emma had taught him. Marry. Together. Always. But the words felt wrong in his fingers, too formal for what filled his chest. "Emma," he said aloud to the milk cow, "I want with the morning coffee she made," her hand steadying his when he signed wrong, the way she hummed off key while working, feeling music through her bones, laughter, silent laughter that shook shoulders but made no sound. Jake spun. Emma stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth, eyes bright with humor. She'd been watching. Heat flooded Jake's face. Emma stepped into the barn, took his hands, moved them through the correct sign for Mary. He'd been doing it backward. She corrected his grip, the angle of his wrist. Her fingers warm against his, she stepped back, signed slowly. "You want to ask something?" Jake's mouth went dry. He signed what he could. "You, me, together, always." Emma's humor faded. She touched her chest, signed, "Already said yes, no, yes, but—" Jake gave up on signs, grabbed the slate from his pocket, wrote, "Real marriage, not contract, choose each other." Emma took the chalk. "I choose," even though, Jake gestured at himself, the barn, the modest cabin beyond. Emma wrote firmly, "Not even though, because." She set down the slate, took his face in her hands, spoke aloud, careful and clear. "Yes, Jacob, yes." His name in her voice, rough from disuse but certain, broke something loose in Jake's chest. He pulled her close, her forehead against his shoulder. Her heart beat fast as his own. The contract expired March 15th, a Wednesday. They'd marry Saturday. Jake rode to town alone. Emma needed to finish her dress from the blue fabric. Pastor Williams sat in his study, books piled high. Mr. Sutter heard an interesting rumor about marrying Emma Hartley. Yes. The pastor's eyebrows rose. You're serious. Never more serious. She's afflicted. Jake's jaw tightened. She's educated, works harder than anyone, and she can hear some enough. Enough for what? For marriage vows. Williams leaned back. The town won't like it. The town doesn't have to live with it. You'll need witnesses. I'll find them. The pastor studied Jake's face. You love her. Love. Was that the word for this feeling? For the way his chest got tight when Emma smiled? Yes. Williams nodded. Saturday, then, 2:00. Jake's next stop was Jensen's store. The owner looked up from his ledger. Sutter, more credit. Need a wedding band. Jensen dropped his pencil. You're really doing it. Saturday. You're invited. Don't have rings here. Have to order from Denver. Something simple. Plain gold. Jensen pulled out a catalog, pointed to options. Jake chose the cheapest, still cost more than he had. Put it on account. I'll work it off. As Jake turned to leave, Mrs. Jensen appeared from the back room. Wait. She disappeared upstairs, returned with something wrapped in tissue paper. My daughter's. She outgrew it. A dress, white cotton with the tiny pearl buttons. Emma's, smaller than Mary was. Mrs. Jensen continued, but I could take it in. Jake's throat got tight. Why, saw her in here. How those women treated her wasn't right. Girl deserves a wedding dress. Jake carried the dress home like spun gold. Found Emma in the garden, planting onion sets. Handed her the package. She unwrapped it slowly, hand stilling, when white cotton appeared. Her eyes flew to his, questioning. Mrs. Jensen for wedding. Emma pressed the dress to her chest. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She signed, thank you, over and over. Saturday came gray and keen, wind from the north. Jake put on his father's suit from the trunk. It hung loose. He'd lost weight over winter. Emma had pressed it yesterday with the iron heated on the stove. He knocked on the new room's door. Emma had slept there last night. Said she wanted to come to marriage from her own space. She opened the door. The white dress fit perfect. Mrs. Jensen had come yesterday for fitting. Emma had braided her hair in a krone, pinned with tiny white flowers from the wild plum tree. Her mother's curtains framed her in the window light. Jake forgot to breathe. Emma touched her dress, signed, good, he nodded. Couldn't sign back. Hands wouldn't work right. They rode to town in silence. Emma's hand rested on the wagon seat between them. Jake covered it with his own. The church looked empty from outside. Jake's stomach dropped. But inside, 20 people. More. Mrs. Jensen in the front row, Wilson from the neighboring farm, the barrel maker and his wife, even Bradley, the county clerk, standing in the back, and Mrs. Patterson holding a cake. Figured you'd need witnesses, Jensen called out, and cake. Pastor Williams stood at the altar. Shall we begin? Jake and Emma walked down the aisle together. No one to give her away. She gave herself. Williams had written the vows on paper so Emma could read them. But when the time came, she spoke them aloud, slow, careful, but clear. I, Emma Rose, take thee. Jake's turn, he spoke and signed both. I, Jacob James, take thee, Emma Rose. The ring delivered that morning glid onto her finger, plain gold band that cost 3 months of hauling work, worth every load. You may kiss your bride. Jake had never kissed her before. This was declaration, promise, beginning. The church erupted in applause. Emma felt the vibration through the floor, smiled wide. Outside, tables had appeared. Food every family had brought something. Even Mrs. Patterson's cake, 3 layers high. As the sun set, people drifted away. Handshakes for Jake, careful hugs for Emma. Mrs. Patterson was last. I was wrong. she said to Emma, over-enunciating. Emma read her lips, nodded. Mrs. Patterson turned to Jake. Take care of her. She takes care of herself. I just get to watch. The ride home felt different. Not Jake and his servant. Not even Jake and Emma. Something new. Inside the cabin, Emma went to her room, came back wearing her everyday dress. She'd hung the wedding dress carefully on a peg. She started making coffee, then stopped. Looked at Jake. Everything was different now. Jake picked up the slate, wrote, What do you want? Emma took the chalk. To sit together. No work tonight. They sat at the table, coffee between them. The marriage certificate lay beside the sugar bowl. Emma traced their names with one finger. Emma stood, walked to Jake's chair. He pushed back, unsure. She sat on his lap, her weight warm against him. She took his hands, placed them around her waist, leaned back against his chest. They sat like that, watching darkness fall outside. Emma's fingers traced patterns on Jake's hands. He pressed his face into her hair, smelled soap and sunshine. She turned, spoke against his ear. Husband. The word broken into two parts. Careful pronunciation. Jake's chest got full. He touched her face, shaped the word with his lips so she could read, wife. Emma smiled. She stood, took his hand, led him to the doorway between his old space and her new room. They stood on the threshold. Emma signed something new. He raised his eyebrows. What? She finger-spelled slowly, Home, then placed both their hands, clasped together, over her heart. 5 years on. Emma teaches signs to the school children while Jake builds the new schoolhouse. Their daughter, born hearing, bridges both worlds with equal grace. The auction platform became lumber for the church expansion. Miss Patterson now brings soup when neighbors fall sick, having learned that judgment is a luxury none can afford. The $14 Jake spent grows into legend best investment in county history. Not because it bought a servant, but because it recognized a soul. Emma never speaks much aloud, doesn't need to. Their language is hands, work, presence. The banker's wife learns basic signs. The store clerk's daughter, born deaf, finds a teacher in Emma. Disclaimer: this story was inspired by historical accounts of indentured service in the American frontier, created solely for entertainment purposes. This work does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence, human trafficking, or harmful behavior toward persons with disabilities. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. The story aims to honor the resilience of marginalized individuals in history while acknowledging the injustices they faced. We recognize the painful reality of such practices and present this narrative as a testament to human dignity, prevailing over dehumanizing circumstances.